I didn't know the family reunion slideshow would end with my mother-in-law demanding to see my husband's phone while everyone watched in silence. My name is Zara Patel, and for 4 years I believed I was the problem wife who couldn't appreciate adventure, while my husband's family pitied him for being married to someone so difficult. The first time Damien went to Costa Rica without me, I understood. It was 2020, right after the pandemic lockdowns lifted, and I just started a new position as a project manager at a healthcare tech company. I couldn't take time off 3 months into a new job. Damien had been planning the trip for years, had deposits down, didn't want to lose the money. He said he'd go alone, make the best of it, and we'd plan something together once I was more established at work. I felt guilty watching him pack, felt like I was letting him down.
He kissed me goodbye at the airport and said he understood, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes. He came back 2 weeks later with photos of zip lines and cloud forests and beaches, showed them to his parents at Sunday dinner. His mother, Priya, made sympathetic noises and said, "What a shame I couldn't go." His father, Rajesh, said, "Young careers require sacrifice." Damien's sister, Meera, asked when I'd finally be able to take vacation time.
I sat there feeling small and apologetic while Damien talked about the adventures I'd missed. He said it would have been better with me there, that he'd wanted to share it with his wife. Everyone looked at me like I'd chosen spreadsheets over paradise. I told myself it was fine, that next time would be different, that once I had more seniority, I'd be able to travel with him. We'd make up for lost time. Except there was no next time. Not for me, anyway. 6 months later, Damien started planning a hiking trip through Patagonia, 3 weeks in Chile and Argentina. He asked if I could get the time off. I checked with my manager. She said maybe in another year, but we were launching a new product in 4 months, and she needed all hands on deck. I told Damien I couldn't go. He said he'd already put down deposits, that he'd been dreaming of this trip since college, that he couldn't postpone it again. Again, like I'd made him postpone it before.
I hadn't. This was the first I'd heard of Patagonia being a dream destination. He went alone, came back with photos of mountains and glaciers, showed them at Sunday dinner again. This time, Priya's sympathy had an edge to it. She asked me gently if I even liked traveling, if maybe Damien and I had different priorities. I said I loved traveling, but work was complicated right now. Meera suggested I look for a job with better work-life balance. Damien said nothing.
Just showed more photos of places I wasn't in. The pattern continued. Iceland in 2021, Norway in 2022, Japan in early 2023. Every trip, Damien would tell me the dates, ask if I could go, accept my explanation about work, and book it solo anyway. And every trip, his family would hear about how I couldn't make it, how work was too demanding, how I prioritized my career over my marriage. The narrative calcified around me. Zara doesn't travel. Zara is married to her job. Poor Damien, tied to someone who won't explore the world with him. I started to believe it myself. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe I was too focused on work. Maybe I needed to push back harder with my manager, take vacation even when it was inconvenient, prove to Damien and his family that I wasn't the boring homebody they thought I was. But something about that narrative felt wrong, because I did ask for time off. I requested vacation days regularly. I just never seemed to get them approved for the times Damien wanted to travel. My manager would cite project deadlines, product launches, critical meetings, and I'd accept it because I was still relatively new, still trying to prove myself, still afraid of being seen as someone who didn't pull her weight. Then, in March of 2023, something shifted. My company implemented a new HR system that tracked everything digitally. Vacation requests, approvals, denials, all time-stamped and logged. I started using it to plan ahead, requesting time off months in advance to increase my chances of approval. In April, I requested 2 weeks off in September, submitted it through the system with a note that I wanted to travel with my husband. My manager approved it within 48 hours. I was thrilled. I told Damien that night, said we could finally plan a trip together. Where did he want to go? He said that was great, but he'd already booked New Zealand for September. Solo trip. He'd put the deposit down last month. I stared at him. I'd been talking about wanting to visit New Zealand for 3 years. I'd shown him articles about hiking trails and Lord of the Rings filming locations. I'd said multiple times that it was my dream destination. "Why didn't you ask me first?" I said, "before booking it, before putting down a deposit?" He said he didn't think I'd be able to get the time off. I said I just did. 2 weeks in September. Approved. He looked uncomfortable. Said his trip was 3 weeks and he'd already customized the itinerary for solo hiking, that it would be complicated to change it now, that maybe I could come for part of it. Part of it. Like I was an add-on to his adventure instead of a partner. I said never mind. He looked relieved. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Damien left for New Zealand in September. I had 2 weeks of approved vacation with nowhere to go. I thought about traveling alone, but the idea made me sad in a way I couldn't articulate. Instead, I stayed home, painted our bedroom, organized closets, read 4 books. It was the most relaxed I'd felt in years, but also the loneliest. Damien came back with hundreds of photos, showed them at Sunday dinner like always. This time, Priya asked me directly why I hadn't gone. I said I'd had the time off approved, but Damien had already booked a solo trip. Everyone went quiet. Damien said I'd gotten the time off approved too late, that he'd already committed to the itinerary. Mira said it seemed like bad timing. Rajesh said communication is important in marriage. The subject changed, but I felt the weight of their judgment, like I'd failed again somehow, like even when I got vacation approved, I still couldn't make it work. I went home and pulled up the HR system, looked at my vacation request for September, submitted April 18th, approved April 20th. I searched my email for Damien's New Zealand booking confirmation. Found it, dated May 3rd, 2 weeks after I'd gotten vacation approved. He'd booked the trip after I told him I had time off, not before. I sat with that information for a long time. Then I went back through the HR system and looked at every vacation request I'd made in the last 4 years. Pulled up the dates, cross-referenced them with Damien's travel. A pattern emerged that made my hands shake. Costa Rica 2020. I'd requested those exact dates off in January. Denied because I was too new. Damien booked his trip in February, after my denial. Patagonia 2021. I'd requested 3 weeks in December. Denied because of the product launch. Damien booked his trip in March, after my denial. Iceland, Norway, Japan. Every single time I'd requested vacation first. Every single time I'd been denied, and every single time Damien had booked his solo trip after my denial for the exact dates I'd requested. He was waiting to see if I'd get time off approved, and when I didn't, he was booking trips for those same dates, deliberately choosing times when I couldn't come, then telling his family I refused to travel, that I prioritized work, that I ruined trips. I wasn't the problem. I was being excluded, systematically, deliberately. I didn't confront him. Not yet, because I needed to understand why. Why would someone plan trips specifically for times their spouse couldn't come? What was the point of being married to someone if you engineered situations to avoid them? I started paying attention differently, watching Damien's patterns. He'd started working from home more often, which I thought was nice, more time together. But when I looked closer, he was working from the guest room with the door closed, taking calls I couldn't hear, laughing at things I wasn't part of. I checked our credit card statements, found charges I didn't recognize. Hotels in cities Damien had supposedly visited alone for work conferences. Restaurants for two. I felt sick. Then I felt stupid for not seeing it sooner. But I didn't have proof, just vacation request timestamps and suspicious credit card charges, and a gut feeling that my husband had been lying to me for years. Then Priya called in October, said the family was planning a big reunion for Thanksgiving weekend. That Damien had suggested doing a slideshow of all his travel photos from the past few years, a celebration of the places he'd been. She wanted to make sure I was okay with it, didn't want me to feel bad about not being in the photos. I told her it sounded lovely, that I'd love to see all of Damien's adventures in one place. She sounded relieved, said she was glad I was being so understanding, that it wasn't easy being married to someone with such wanderlust. I hung up and immediately started planning, because if Damien wanted to show his family all the places he'd been without me, I was going to show them exactly why I hadn't been there. I printed everything, every vacation request I'd submitted through the HR system with dates and denial reasons, every email confirmation of Damien's bookings showing he'd reserved trips after my denials, every credit card statement with suspicious charges. I organized it chronologically by trip: Costa Rica. I brought my famous saag paneer and the folder hidden in my bag. After dinner, Damien set up his laptop and projector, dimmed the lights, started the slideshow. Costa Rica appeared on the wall. Zip lines and beaches, Damien narrated. Said he'd wanted to share this with me, but I couldn't get the time off. Everyone made sympathetic noises. Patagonia, mountains and glaciers. Damien said work had prevented me from coming. Priya said, "What beautiful photos, what incredible experiences." She looked at me with that familiar mixture of pity and judgment. I stood up, asked if I could show something. Damien looked confused. Priya said, "Of course." I pulled out my folder, connected my phone to the projector, pulled up my first document. "This is my vacation request for Costa Rica," I said. The dates matched Damien's trip exactly. Submitted January 2020, denied February 2020 because I was too new at my job. I showed the HR system screenshot with timestamps. Then I pulled up Damien's booking confirmation for Costa Rica, dated 3 weeks after my denial, for the exact dates I'd requested. The room went very quiet. I moved to the next slide: Patagonia vacation request, submitted June 2020, denied August 2020 due to product launch. Damien's booking confirmation dated September 2020, same dates. Iceland, Norway, Japan, New Zealand, every single trip showing this same pattern. Me requesting time off first, getting denied. Damien booking solo trips for those exact dates after my denials. I let the final slide sit there. 6 trips. 6 times I'd tried to travel with my husband. 6 times he'd waited until I couldn't come and then booked trips without me. 4 times he knew I'd already been denied. Mira spoke first. Her voice was shaking. "Why would you do that? Why would you wait until she couldn't come?" Damien's face had gone white. "This is out of context," he said. "You don't understand. The trips were already planned. The dates were coincidence." I pulled up an email, read it out loud. Message from Damien to me dated April 2023. "I'm thinking about New Zealand in September, but I know you probably can't get time off, so I might just book it solo. Let me know if work approves any vacation requests." Then I showed my HR approval for September vacation, dated April 20th. Showed my response email to Damien the same day, telling him I got the time approved and asking where he wanted to go together. Showed his response. "That's great, babe, but I already put down a deposit for New Zealand, solo trip. Maybe you can come for part of it." Showed his booking confirmation, dated May 3rd, 2 weeks after I'd told him I had vacation approved. He'd lied. I'd told him I could come and he'd booked it solo anyway, then told me he'd already committed before I got approval. Priya stood up, walked to Damien, asked him to explain. He tried, said the deposits were non-refundable, that I'd gotten approval too late, that he'd needed the trips for himself, for space, for adventure. Then why lie? Priya said. Why tell us Zara wouldn't travel? Why make it sound like she was the problem? Damien didn't answer. Rajesh asked to see Damien's phone. Damien said no. Rajesh said if there was nothing to hide, show us your phone. Damien refused. The room erupted. Mira was crying.
Priya was demanding answers. Various relatives were talking over each other. I pulled up one more document. Credit card statements. Highlighted the charges from Damien's trips. Hotels that cost twice what a single room should cost. Restaurant bills for two. Bar charges late at night in cities where Damien claimed to be hiking alone. Show them your photos, I said quietly. The ones you didn't include in the slideshow. The ones on your phone that you thought I'd never see. Damien's face crumbled. Priya grabbed his phone from his hand before he could stop her. She was his mother, and she'd had enough of the lies. She opened his photo gallery, started scrolling through the New Zealand album. The public one had landscapes and hiking selfies. The private one had photos of Damien with a woman, blonde, athletic, smiling. In photos at restaurants, at hotels, at scenic overlooks. The same woman appeared in photos from Japan, from Norway, from Iceland. Who is this? Priya whispered.
Her name is Kendall, I said. I'd found her Instagram 3 days ago. Once I had the credit card charges, it was easy to cross-reference locations and dates. She'd been tagging herself at the same places Damien visited, the same restaurants, the same hotels. She'd been careful not to post photos of them together, but the timestamps matched perfectly. Damien was taking his mistress on international vacations while telling his family I refused to travel. While positioning himself as the adventurous husband trapped in a marriage with a boring, work-obsessed wife, while making me feel guilty for prioritizing my career when he'd been engineering situations where I couldn't possibly come along. He'd waited for my vacation denials and then booked trips for those exact dates because he needed an alibi, needed to explain to his family why his wife wasn't with him. If I'd requested different dates, he would have found a different excuse.
The point was having me stay home so he could travel with someone else. Meera was shouting now. Priya was crying. Rajesh had his head in his hands. Damien tried to explain, said it wasn't an affair, that Kendall was just a friend, that they traveled together because I wouldn't, that he'd needed companionship. I asked how many trips. He didn't answer. I said I'd found receipts going back to 2020. 4 years of trips. 4 years of lying.
4 years of making his family think I was the problem while he vacationed with another woman using money from our joint account. An aunt asked if I was leaving him. I said yes. I'd already consulted a divorce attorney, already documented everything, already started separating our finances. I was done. Damien looked at me like I'd betrayed him, like showing his family the truth was worse than the lying itself. He said we should talk about this privately. I said no.
He'd made our marriage public by parading his victim narrative at every family dinner for 4 years. He'd humiliated me at countless Sunday meals while his family pitied him. Now they could see exactly who deserved their pity. Priya asked me to leave Damien's phone with her. I did. She said she'd make sure I got copies of everything I needed for the divorce. That she was ashamed of her son, that she'd believed him and judged me, and she was so sorry. I told her I understood.
That Damien was very convincing, that I'd believed him too for a long time, believed I was the problem wife who couldn't appreciate adventure, who ruined trips by being unavailable. It had taken years to see that I wasn't ruining anything. I was being deliberately excluded so Damien could maintain a separate life. I left the reunion early, drove home alone, filed for divorce the following Monday. Damien tried to fight it, said we could work through this, that he'd end things with Kendall. that he wanted to save our marriage. I said no, because even if Kendall disappeared, the core problem remained. Damien didn't want a partner. He wanted an alibi, someone to blame for his absences while he lived exactly the life he wanted. He'd systematically engineered situations to exclude me and then blamed me for being excluded. That wasn't something couples therapy could fix. The divorce took 6 months. I got half of everything, including repayment for the vacations he'd taken with Kendall using our money. My attorney argued that those were marital assets spent on extramarital affairs. The judge agreed. Damien's family stopped speaking to him. Priya called me monthly to check in, said she was horrified she believed his narrative, that she'd judged me unfairly, that she hoped I could forgive her. I told her I already had, that Damien had fooled both of us. That manipulation works because the manipulator is convincing. I took my first real vacation last month, 2 weeks in Morocco, solo trip. I hiked in the Atlas Mountains, explored Marrakesh, watched the sunset over the Sahara. I took hundreds of photos, posted them on social media with captions about finally traveling on my own terms. Mira commented on every photo, said they were beautiful, said I deserved this. Priya sent me a message saying she was proud of me for not letting Damien's betrayal stop me from exploring the world. Damien sent me one text during the trip, said he was glad I was finally traveling, that he'd always wanted me to experience these things. I blocked his number, because the narrative Damien wanted was that I couldn't travel, that I was too focused on work, too boring, too unwilling to adventure. But the truth was simpler and crueler. I'd wanted to travel. I'd requested time off. I'd tried to plan trips with my husband, and he'd systematically ensured I couldn't come so he'd have an excuse to take someone else. People ask me how I stayed calm during that slideshow, how I presented all the evidence without crying or screaming. I tell them I'd been living with the truth for weeks by that point. I'd had time to process, time to grieve, time to get angry and then move past the anger into something colder and more focused. Damien wanted to show his family his adventures. I let him. Then I showed them the pattern behind those adventures, the vacation requests he'd waited for me to get denied, the bookings he'd made for those exact dates, the lies he'd told to explain my absence, the credit card charges proving he'd never been alone. I didn't ruin his slideshow. I just added context he'd deliberately omitted. Let his family see the full picture instead of the carefully curated version where he was the victim and I was the villain. And when Priya grabbed his phone and found the photos he'd tried to hide, when the whole narrative collapsed in real time in front of 15 relatives, Damien finally experienced what I'd felt for 4 years, the humiliation of being exposed, the shame of being seen for exactly who he was. He'd made me the wife who wouldn't travel. I became the wife who documented everything and waited for the perfect moment to show the truth. Not at a quiet dinner, not in private, but at a family reunion slideshow celebrating his adventures. The adventures he'd taken with someone else while blaming me for staying home. I didn't destroy Damien's relationship with his family. His lies did that. I just stopped protecting him from the consequences. And I did it with timestamps that couldn't be argued with and credit card statements that told the story he'd tried to hide. 4 years of vacation requests, 4 years of denials, 4 years of solo trips that were never solo.
And one Thanksgiving slideshow where everything came out. The photos are still up on the wall at Priya's house, according to Mira. Not Damien's travel photos. My evidence slides. She said her mother keeps them there as a reminder that people aren't always who they claim to be. That sometimes the person being blamed is actually the person being betrayed. That truth matters even when it's uncomfortable. I don't know if Damien ever thinks about that night, if he regrets the slideshow idea.
If he wishes he'd been honest from the beginning, instead of building an elaborate lie that eventually collapsed under its own weight. I think about it sometimes. Not with anger, with clarity. I'd spent years believing I was failing as a wife. Damien had shown me I was succeeding at something much harder, surviving a marriage to someone who needed me to fail so his double life could thrive. I'm traveling to Greece next month. 3 weeks. Already approved, already booked.
Just me and the adventures I choose. No one to exclude me, no one to blame me for staying home, just my name on the itinerary and my life finally mine again.
You've just stepped into her revenge side, where every wound finds its justice, and every silence ends with truth. If her story struck a chord, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Your support keeps these stories alive. Another secret waits in the next video. See how her revenge begins.